He said he could make UFOs manifest. So I said, could you do that for me? And he said, yes, he would. He would create a demonstration. It would be within, he said, I'll make 3 UFO sightings, and you will know that I caused them.
So tell me about the PK Man.
The PK Man is a fellow named Ted Owens.
Okay.
I met him in 1976. I'd been aware of his reputation before then. But there is a remote viewing connection because I met him at SRI.
Oh, wow.
International. Hal Puthoff and Russell Targ were running the program there. Russell, incidentally, is not a Scientologist.
Jack always talks about Russell. Yeah. Russell Targ.
I recently published a book of 15 interviews with Russell Targ.
Is he still alive?
Yes, he just turned 90 last April.
Wow. What's he doing nowadays?
Well, at the age of 90, he's slowed down a bit. But he still does interviews.
Yeah, that's amazing.
Yeah, you could probably get him.
Oh, I would love to.
He's a very good friend of mine. I would call him a dear friend.
Does he live? Do you guys live close to each other?
No, I used to live in the Bay Area, so Russell and I would get together practically every week.
Oh, okay.
But now I've moved far away.
Right. So the PK Man.
The PK Man, Ted Owens, I was invited to SRI to experience remote viewing for myself. It was February 1976.
Right.
And I did. I did what I regard as a successful remote viewing experience then. And but while I was there, the people in the office were all abuzz about this character, Ted Owens, because he had been writing to them for some time, saying they had achieved already a lot of notoriety, which they didn't want, because of their work with Uri Geller, the Israeli psychic.
Yeah.
And Ted Owens was writing to them saying, why are you wasting your time with this Israeli psychic? Because I'm the world's greatest psychic. You should be testing me. And this went on for some time.
I'll see you bend a spoon, buddy.
They kept ignoring him. And then shortly before my visit, he wrote to them and he said, I'm going to prove to you that I am the world's greatest psychic. And he said, right now there's a terrible drought going on in California, which there was. It was so bad that they piped water where I lived across the Richmond Bridge into Marin County.
Oh, wow.
And people would say, if it's yellow, let it mellow. Don't flush your toilet. If it's brown, flush it down. So very serious drought. He said, I'm going to end that drought, and you will know that I ended it. It will happen in a matter of days, and there will be every crazy kind of weather, snow, sleet, hail, and UFO sightings, which is my trademark. And your local newspaper will publish an article saying that the drought is ended. And at the time, the newspaper stories were saying no end in sight to the drought. So this happened like 3 days later after Owens had sent them the message. So Russell Targ sent him back a message saying, that was a very good prediction. Congratulations. And Ted Owens wrote back to them and said, hell no, it was not a prediction. I caused it. And that's when they said, we can't have this guy here. We're working with the CIA. We're getting government funding. We need to keep a very low profile. But Jeffrey, you're a young, promising graduate student. Would you mind taking this file that we had, a large file of communication from him, off of our hands? Maybe you could follow up on it.
Who said this?
Hal Puthoff and Russell Targ.
They told you to take this?
Yeah, which I did. I took their file. And I met Ted Owens a few months later in England. I was attending a parapsychology conference in England, and it turned out that word got out about the drought in California. In fact, they published a little news story about it in a magazine popular at that time called Psychic Magazine. People in England were then experiencing a drought that summer. And they heard about it, and they invited Ted Owens to come to England to end the drought there. And when I arrived in England, I had friends who said to me, if you want to get your picture in the front page of the London Times, all you have to do is walk down Piccadilly Circus carrying an umbrella. People will think you're crazy, and they'll take your picture, and you'll be in the front page of the newspaper.
Why would you be crazy if you were holding an umbrella?
Because it was a drought. There was no rain in sight.
Or sun, probably, right? Very little sun out there.
Right. And so the day that Ted Owens arrived in England, it began raining and pouring. It's so bad it shut down what they called the tube, the subway system in London. And a few days later, the newspapers said drought is over, just like that.
Wow.
And so I met him at this conference, and we became friends, and that's when I initiated a research project with him that ran until his death in 1987. And I collected, I think, about 160 examples of this sort of demonstration that he did over and over and over again to try to prove to people that he had these abilities and that they were real and that they could be very useful.
What was the most compelling evidence that you were able to come up with about him?
Well, when I went through the files, one of the things that really caught my eye was the fact that he said he could make UFOs manifest. And there were eyewitness testimony from police officers who said, yes, Ted Owens said he would cause a UFO, and I saw it. And so I said, could you do that for me? And he said, yes, he would. He would create a demonstration in the San Francisco Bay Area where I lived. It would be within, he said, I'll make 3 UFO sightings within 100 miles of San Francisco. And you will know that I caused them. And as the process evolved, I was in touch with him a lot. One day, I'm on the phone with him, and he said, I feel it coming really strong. He said, this is going to be one of the biggest sightings ever. He said, it will be seen by hundreds of people. It will be photographed, and the photograph will be published on the front page of one of your local newspapers. And that happened 4 days later. Exactly.
What was the date in the can we find it online,
yes,
do you think?
Yeah, well, if I recall correctly, it was the Berkeley Gazette.
Berkeley Gazette
was the newspaper. I think the photo was December 12th, 1976. I hope I have that correct.
And we would search for like UFO sighting or UFO.
Well, I don't know how you're going to search it. I can send it to you if you want.
Okay, Steve can find it.
Yeah, if you can find it, that would be good. It was on the front page, and here's what happened. It's a more complex story, but the art department at Sonoma State College, as it was then known, it's now Sonoma State University, sponsored an exhibit of a very unusual art form where there was a pilot named Stephen Pileski who had a small airplane with smoke trailing out the back, and he's making designs in the sky, and this is his art form. And so the whole art department is out there with their cameras, and a UFO shows up right in his airspace. So it's seen from the air and from the ground. It's photographed and videotaped. The photograph was published on the front page of the Berkeley Gazette, as Ted Owens had told me, and the videotape was broadcast on the Channel 9 Evening News, KQED, in San Francisco.
What did the UFO look like?
It was lozenge-shaped. It was about, 30 feet.
Like a Tic Tac?
Yeah, similar. And
what color?
I don't recall that a color was specified offhand. But I have to say, there you go.
That was a tough one. All right, we got it.
Yeah.
Boom.
Can you punch in on it?
Yeah. Oh, I think I found a more higher resolution of this specific image.
That doesn't look like anything.
Well, That, you see, what I'm pretty sure you're looking at is the airplane itself.
Oh, okay. With the smoke. That's the guy with the smoke.
The back. When I have reviewed the videotapes, I have reviewed the photograph, it's not at all clear to me that a UFO actually showed up.
Right.
But I've also interviewed the witnesses who insist that it did. So
That's a better one.
it's a little more peculiar in terms of understanding what actually happened. But Ted
Okay, yeah,
Owens,
that's the plane. Yeah.
there it is, right on
That's
the
a
front
flight plane,
page.
man.
Let's read what it says. Aerial artist UFO encounter. What is the little fine text underneath?
Where the fuck are you?
Right there. Yeah, right there. Stephen Poleski, who, wind permitting, creates aerial art by flying a stunt plane overhead while leaving trails of colored smoke, was startled Wednesday by performing over Cal State Sonoma. Poleski suddenly became aware of a circular white object only 1,000 feet away. The event was also captured on Channel 9 TV cameras, and Poleski said videotape reruns check out and confirm the existence of a curious co-pilot in the sky. Poleski, a visiting professor at UC Berkeley, may have attracted a vast new audience for his unique art forms. Interesting.
Yeah.
Wow. And this is right. How long after the guy told you there was going to be sightings?
4 days.
4 days.
Yeah.
So were there any repeatable experiments that you could do with him that you could document and test?
Very difficult.
It's not, because this doesn't pass scientific method muster, right?
No, but what I did attempt to do, because I had very little time, I said, can you do this for me? And he said, yes, starting now for the next 90 days, I'm going to do this. So I thought I'd try to create a control group.
Right.
Because I had no idea how many UFOs would appear in any 90-day window within 100 miles of San Francisco.
Exactly.
So I took San Diego, which is a city of similar size on the West Coast.
Right.
And similar social environment. And I had friends who were students in the physics department there. And what I did to test, I sent letters out to all the law enforcement agencies within 100 miles of San Francisco. I had the San Diego people send letters out to all the law enforcement agencies within 100 miles of San Diego as a way of comparing. And we actually didn't get 3 sightings, as Owens had promised. We got 2 in the San Francisco Bay Area. In San Diego, they got none. So there, was a semblance of trying to impose as many scientific controls as possible. But when you're dealing with a character like Ted Owens, it's usually not possible, because he liked to see himself, he called it the Owens effect. He hoped people would use that, like the Geller effect for bending spoons. But his idea was that just as you can bend a spoon with your mind, you can affect large-scale systems. So he tended to focus in on droughts, on UFOs, on power blackouts, hurricanes, tornadoes, heat and cold spells, large-scale systems like that. They're very difficult to evaluate statistically. It's not like a clean laboratory experiment.
Right, yeah, you can't measure it in a lab. It's not repeatable.
Well, he did repeat the demonstrations. I have documents for 160 some of them, and I would say offhand that roughly 2/3 of them worked out the way he said they would. And very unusual things happened, and that probably had, to just my intuitive sense, maybe a probability of happening of 1% or less.
So did you ever do any experiments with him, like bringing in a box with something in it? You're like, tell me what's in this box.
No.
Or like in Annie's book, she talks about they suspended something off the ceiling, like they suspended a flat platform from the ceiling, and they would place things on top of it, and they would have to go out of body to go figure out what it was.
Sure, those are interesting experiments, but they're different than the things that he claimed to be able to do. I convened a meeting of researchers. J. Allen Hynek showed up, and many other researchers, to try and get the scientific community behind doing some serious testing with Ted Owens, J. Allen Hynek, who was very familiar with the case, said, I wouldn't touch him with a 10-foot pole. And the reason is because the phenomenon he produces come out of the unconscious, and they're unpredictable and not into it. So I wasn't, I was a graduate student at the time doing this kind of research. One of my professors at Berkeley, a parapsychologist, resigned from my committee because I was engaged in looking at UFO phenomenon.
Really?
Yeah.
Why would they do that?
Because they believed that UFOs and parapsychology should not mix. And there are still parapsychologists today who hold to that belief that, it's like we've got one paranormal science and we shouldn't mix it with another one because it would be too difficult or too controversial.
You did some sort of, what was it? It was like a competition or something with that billionaire dude.
Oh yeah, the Bigelow essay.
Bigelow, yeah.
Competition.
What was that about?
It was to write a 25,000-word essay on the best evidence for survival of human consciousness after permanent bodily death.
Why did he want to do that?
Well, shortly before he announced the contest, his wife died. Oh. And he also had a son and I think a grandson who had died from suicide.
Oh, no.
Yeah, so he had developed, and I think, to be fair, he had an interest in the afterlife going back a long time. He had sort of pushed it off to the side, but at that point in time, his wife had died, his grandson and son had taken their lives, and his aerospace business had become basically, how to put it, the governor of the state of Nevada during the pandemic had declared his aerospace business to be a non-essential business so that the employees he could have kept them on the payroll, I suppose, but they couldn't come into the factory. So he let all the employees go. They were swept up by other companies, and in effect, he no longer had a business.
Oh, no.
So
he decided to do this. That's wild.
Yeah. I mean, I think it's a very creative solution.
Oh, it's super creative. I mean, like people that are willing to spend that much money to do something like this, where there's no monetary return, like there's no profit to be found, just out of pure creativity and curiosity.
Right.
That's really cool.
Yeah.
And what was how did it work? So how did he pick people to do this? And what was the prize?
Had to fill out an application in order to be qualified to write the essay. He wanted serious people who really understood the field.
Okay.
And as I recall, there were maybe 1,200 people who filled out application forms. Some 200 of them were accepted to write essays.
Okay. And how did you get picked? You wrote out. You filled out an application.
I filled out. Well, here's the interesting thing. I first heard about the competition from Leslie Kean.
Oh yeah.
She
works for the New York Times, right?
Yeah, well, she was a stringer for the New York Times. She'd written articles about UFOs. She had written a book about survival, and she said to me,
survival.
Yes.
Oh, okay.
She has a book called, I think it's titled Surviving Death.
Oh, wow.
Or something of that sort. So she was known. And in fact, now that I think about it, I heard about the essay and I reached out to her. I said, Leslie, you should enter. You just published a book on the topic. And she got back to me and said, no, I'm one of the judges. And then she said, you got to listen to this podcast with George Knapp because Bigelow was asked, who should enter the competition? And he said, people like Jeffrey Mishlove should enter.
Who said? George Knapp said this?
No, Bigelow.
Oh, Bigelow said this. Okay.
Yeah, Robert,
oh, wow.
Robert Bigelow said people who have been studying.
Oh, so he was a fan of yours.
This material all their lives.
That's so cool.
Yeah.
All right. So walk me through.
Well, I told you about my experience with Uncle Harry.
Yes.
That was sort of the beginning of my essay because it changed my life. And what I found in going through the literature is that people who have had profound shared death, near-death experiences often experience profound life changes.
Right.
Example would be Bishop Pike. I don't know if you remember Bishop Pike. This is in the 1960s.
Yeah.
He was the Episcopalian Bishop of California.
Episcopalian Bishop of California. Okay.
Yes. And his son died. His son died of suicide. And he was terribly distraught, and he was in England at the time meeting with the Episcopalians in England and the English Catholics, and they had a very close relationship with the spiritualists in England. And so his friends said to him, why don't you go and see this particular medium? The name is on the tip of my tongue. And he visited a spiritualist medium who began bringing him very detailed communications from his deceased son, along with the deceased son's godfather, a very well-known theologian. Again, the name is on the tip of my tongue. Yeah. And so convinced him that these are authentic communications. He resigned as Bishop of California so that he could pursue this further.
Wow. Wow.
Another case.
That's profound.
A person whose life was changed dramatically, Elizabeth Kubler-Ross, very well-known medical doctor who began writing about the stages of death and dying. Yeah. She got into that field. She had this long-standing interest. And there was a time in her life when it felt like it's not going anywhere for her. She was doing workshops and seminars.
Right.
And she just didn't feel like they were connecting, and she was ready to give it all up. And she was about to tell her supervisor at the University of Chicago that she's going to change her career direction. And as she's sitting there about to speak to him, they're standing in front of an elevator, as I recall, when a woman steps out of the elevator and says to her, "May I walk with you to your office down the hall?" So instead of resigning, she walks with the woman toward her office, and she recognizes, wait, this woman is Mrs. Schwartz. Mrs. Schwartz is the woman who first informed her about the near-death experience. Elizabeth Kubler-Ross, simultaneous to Raymond Moody, was writing about the near-death experience. But Mrs. Schwartz had died 10 months earlier. And here she is walking down the hall with Elizabeth Kubler-Ross. They get to the office, and Mrs. Schwartz pleads with her, you must not give up your work. Promise me that you won't give up your work. And Elizabeth Kubler-Ross had the presence of mind to say to her, okay, I will make that promise, but would you mind writing that down in a little note for me? And Mrs. Schwartz did, wrote down the note. Mrs. Kubler-Ross kept that note. And then Mrs. Schwartz walked out of the office. Elizabeth Kubler-Ross immediately stuck her head out the door to see if she could see her walking down the hall. There was no one there.
Yeah. Wow.
And that, another example of a life-changing story.
Right. The one about Elizabeth Crone is pretty bananas as well. Yeah. She's the one who was walking into her synagogue and got struck by lightning.
Yes. Yeah. She became a good friend.
She left her body and said she went to this crazy garden, this ethereal place, and she had a choice to go to the afterlife or to go back to her body. She chose to go back to her body, which is that's That blew my mind, that story. That's a funny part too, where I guess somebody saw her get struck by lightning and they ran to the synagogue and said, "Is there a doctor in the house?" Like everyone raised their hand.
And as I recall, it turns out there was a doctor
who was like the best one, right?
For lightning strikes.
Right. What are the chances of that?
Yeah.
Good Lord.
Yeah.
Yeah, and she explained like how she walked in the synagogue and she was like trying to talk to people and get help or whatever because she thought she was hurt, but then she realized that no one was like acknowledging her or interacting with her, and then she turned around and saw her body laying on the ground.
Yeah. And then she noticed she's floating 6 inches above the floor.
Right.
Yeah.
Right. That's so wild.
Mm-hmm.
Okay, so you wrote about this and you ended up winning this whole competition?
Yes.
That's wild. How much money did you win?
$500,000.
$500,000?
Yeah.
Wow. You pay cash? Give you a suitcase full of cash?
It was a check.
After you won this award and you won all this money from Bigelow, after he wrote you the check, what did you have any like conversations with him about this and is he trying to explore this further or push the boundaries of this?
Well, he set up an institute called the Bigelow Institute for Consciousness Studies to explore life after death. Mm-hmm. He invited me to join the board of directors, and but subsequently, I think he's an entrepreneur. I think he's moving in other directions. He's creating a new foundation that is taking over that institute. So I don't know what's happening. I think I'll have to get back in touch with him. He's been very actively involved in politics this year.
Oh, has he really?
Yes.
Interesting.
Yeah. He was, in fact, one of the early...
He's in Nevada, right?
He's in Nevada, yes.
Okay. Yeah, what were you saying? He's doing what?
He became a DeSantis supporter.
Oh, really?
Yes, he gave millions of dollars to DeSantis, and then he got...
really? That's interesting.
He got fed up.
Why DeSantis, you think?
Well, I did have many conversations with him about it. I think he felt that after the January 6th insurrection that Trump was not a viable candidate.
Oh, and he wanted DeSantis to be president.
Yeah, and then after DeSantis signed the bill to make abortion illegal in Florida after 6 weeks, he felt that was too extreme, and he switched his allegiance to Trump.
He did.
Yeah.
Interesting guy, man. Mm-hmm. To have that much money and to be willing just to throw it out at all these crazy ideas and crazy, just like dump millions of dollars just into curiosity that's not gonna pay you back. Like all the people with the most money in the world, it just seems like they do the things that's gonna make them more money. Well,
I give him a lot of credit. I think that nobody has done more to bring the field of survival research into public prominence.
Right. Mm-hmm. The CIA or the government or the military is still doing this kind of stuff, still spending money on this? David Morehouse seems to think so.
Well, I think there's good reason to think so. Mm-hmm. And every time that I have a chance, I ask people who have been involved in the government what they think. And I hear different things. Ed May, who we've referred to earlier, I asked him this question recently, and he said he doesn't think so because there are so many more effective ways these days of gathering intelligence that we don't need remote viewing.
That makes sense.
On the other hand, it was very useful in circumstances where none of the conventional methods were available. And I personally have to think that if the government isn't doing it, it would be a mistake on their part. And I also happen to think that given the social controversy and the fact that if they do it publicly, there's going to be all sorts of hoo-ha about, this is the work of the devil and so forth, that it's better for them to keep it secret.
Right. Yeah, totally. Yeah, there's so much stuff that's secret that you don't hear about until 20 years after they start doing it. Yeah. Like another thing Annie wrote about in her DARPA book was like the stuff that they're doing never comes out to the public and for another 20 years. Like doesn't come out to consumers for example, Elon Musk's Neuralink, the chip that he's putting in people's brains to help them recover from paralysis, or eventually, if you extrapolate into the future, imagine what it could be used for. But she claimed in her research that they've been experimenting on that with soldiers since the early 90s. And I think that's where most of the money goes too, right? A lot of the budgets, these black budgets that you don't see about, that's not reported to Congress, goes to this stuff that has to be kept secret for national security reasons or whatever, to go towards this stuff, because the most money that gets put into technology and innovation is for war. Right.
Yeah. And I can tell you, parapsychology got the tiniest little pittance of that. $20 million over 20 years is not a lot of money for the government.
Right. Well, yeah. So the way David Morehouse was explaining this to me was there were experiments done, or when they did the remote viewing programs, he laid it out beautifully how they do it. And basically how they sit down, they have the person sit down, they don't tell them anything, and they basically give them like some coordinates and ask them specific questions about what they're experiencing, and they were able to determine whether or not they were being accurate or not. And apparently they were. Yeah. A lot of the times, a lot of the people were. Yeah. So did you ever do anything like this specifically?
Yes. When I went to SRI International in February of 1976, I did a classic remote viewing protocol. It was one in which they had the outbound experimenter, who happened to be a friend of mine, Elizabeth Rauscher, who was a physicist. And she went off to a location at random. They had a list of 100 or more target locations, and they get into the car, they roll some dice, they choose at random an envelope from the list of targets, and they go to that location. Okay. And so I'm sitting inside of a Faraday cage, which is an electrically shielded room in the radiophysics laboratory at Stanford Research Institute. And so no radio signals can get in and out. If I had a walkie-talkie, they couldn't have signaled me to let me know where they were. It's also an advantage because it's quiet in the sense you don't have any electronic noise that might otherwise interfere with your neural functioning. So I'm in the room, and what I imagined that I saw looked to me, and I drew a picture. I thought it was a rack of clothing at Macy's department store. And that's what we would call in the field of remote viewing analytical overlay. I had an image, I drew a picture of it, but then I misinterpreted it. The actual target happened to be a highway overpass over Highway 101 in Palo Alto. But if you took my picture of all these hangers coming off of a clothing rack and hold it up next to the picture of the highway overpass that had a cyclone fence surrounding it, they were identical. My drawing matched the target perfectly, even though I totally misinterpreted it. And this is often how remote viewing works. So we tell people who are doing remote viewing, don't try and interpret what you see. Just report the raw sensations. So try to get as directly to the impression as possible without any interpretation, because the mind is always trying to interpret and can easily misinterpret things. They were nowhere near Macy's department store.
Yeah. Do you think that this is an ability that everybody has, or that it's only manifests in certain people?
I would say by virtue of being a sentient human being, everybody has it. I would say this. Earlier you were talking about why you disbelieve that psychic functioning could be real. You had a skeptical attitude. But the truth of the matter is, from the materialist perspective, we shouldn't be conscious at all.
What do you mean? Just looking at the human body.
Just looking at the human body as a machine, there's no reason for consciousness. or no explanation. How do you take dead matter, billiard ball-like particles bouncing around and get conscious experience?
Yeah, that's a good point.
It's called the hard problem of consciousness in philosophy, and it's never been resolved.
Yeah.
But it's an artificial problem. The problem only exists if you take a materialist perspective and say that, the foundation of all that is real are atoms and molecules and protons and electrons bouncing around each other like inert billiard balls. You could also take the perspective that other philosophers have taken, called idealism, that actually reality is based on consciousness,
right,
rather than matter.
Have you ever? There was a theory that we've talked about on this podcast many times. There was a guy, Chardin. You heard of Chardin?
Teilhard de Chardin.
Yeah,
sure.
He had a theory about sort of like a universal consciousness that exists.
The noosphere.
The noosphere.
Yeah.
Yeah. Can you explain that? I'm rusty on it.
Well, in some ways, people think of him as a materialist. You could almost say that the satellites that we have, all the electronic communication, the internet, is part of the noosphere.
Oh, okay. Yes. Yeah. It's a good way. It's a good analogy for the way he because I think there was examples in history or studies that were done where like a primate on one island would discover one thing at the same time that a primate on an island on the opposite side of the world would figure something out.
Yeah.
Right. And the idea is that they're connected somehow consciously with like in this ethereal layer of consciousness that exists around us, and we're just tapping into it.
There was a researcher named Rupert Sheldrake who developed that idea. He called it the morphogenetic field that connects all conscious beings. And a biologist named Lyle Watson wrote a book called The 100th Monkey, in which they talked about the monkeys on some Pacific islands learned how to take rocks and crack open coconuts.
Right.
And as soon as they discovered that this could be done, another island with similar monkeys, 100 miles away, began doing it.
Right.
As if the skill somehow was communicated telepathically.
Yeah. Yeah, there's definitely something to that. Mm-hmm. There's something to that. It's almost impossible to measure, and it doesn't, like, how do you explain that through physics, right? Like you can't.
That's right. You can if you think about it, and I'll give Jack Sarfati some credit for thinking about quantum entanglement as a way, because quantum entanglement does suggest that everything is interconnected. We're not separate from the most distant galaxies.
Right. Yeah. The multi-worlds theory, and this somehow connects to time travel in some weird way. There's the block universe, right?
Well, there are all these different theories. The many worlds theory, the block universe theory, are all separate, I think relatively unrelated methods to account for what you could call the great mystery.
Yes. So is the block universe consistent or compatible with quantum entanglement? No, the block universe is not consistent.
I'm not a physicist, but the block universe came out of Einstein's theory of relativity. And the idea of quantum entanglement comes out of quantum theory.
Right.
They're both really good theories. They both make excellent predictions, uncannily excellent predictions. But they're incompatible with each other. And that's the big mystery of physics right now. How do you reconcile relativity with quantum physics? So far, nobody's been able to do it.
So if we were to ever figure out backwards time travel, which I don't know how we would do that.
There have been seminars on it held at the University of California at San Diego on what they call retrocausality.
Right.
In other words, a particle coming from the present could influence something in the past.
Yes,
And so it's a question that physicists are just starting to look at and are taking seriously.
Yeah, and that ties into like precognition, precognitive dreams, stuff like that. Eric Wargo wrote about that in Time Loops, his book.
That's right.
So, yeah, his theory is like in the future, if there was like some sort of global thermonuclear war and it killed off a lot of humans, our species would stagnate and we would be homogenized, and we would sort of like, we would basically be, you know, we wouldn't be as diverse as a species as we are now. Like, so if there was some sort of cataclysm, or like I said, a global thermonuclear war or something that killed off a lot of species, his crazy theory is, I kind of like the theory, I don't think it's that crazy, that if we were that capable, we would go back in time and take DNA from past humans to try to diversify our species in the future, right?
And maybe that's what's going on.
And if you look at all the cases of the abduction cases from like John Mack,
right?
A lot of them are, a vast majority of them are like extracting eggs and sperm from the people that are being abducted.
I don't know if it's a majority or not, but there's many reports like
right.
that.
Whitley Strieber, he's a big one. About Betty and Barney Hill. They're like the most famous ones, but there's apparently there's a lot of them, and also a lot of them say, of all the cases I think that were documented by John Mack, I think it was like a 70-30 split between the people who actually asked the beings who they were. 30% said they were from some star system, and like 60 or 70% said they were from the future. So that's interesting. And then he's an anthropologist. So what he explained to me was there's this concept called pedomorphism, where I'm going to try to articulate this the best I can because it's complicated. But so he was explaining that in evolution, the farther evolved, at least for primates, they get, the children of the ancestors look more like the adults of the future descendants, right? So if you look at a baby chimp, it's kind of got like a bulbous head, sits straight up like this, right? Its body is kind of small. It's in more proportion of a human being, today. Yeah. When the baby chimp grows up, it's got a smaller cranium, big muscular body. It's kind of like hunched over. He says that this is something that you can extrapolate into the future of our species, that in 100,000 or 1,000,000 years, full-grown human beings are going to look like the toddlers of today. And if you look at all those accounts, they look like children, those beings.
I think it's a very viable hypothesis that the inhabitants of UFOs are future humans traveling backward in time. I don't know of any reason to rule that out.
It would explain the pyramids.
Yeah, it might explain a lot of other mysteries.
A lot of crazy mysteries, right?
Even, I mean, the biggest mystery might be the existence of the human race to begin with.
Right. Yes. Wow. That's deep.
Well, consider, 300,000 years ago or so, there were our so-called primate ancestors. They didn't, from what we can tell, have large brains.
Right.
They didn't have speech the way we know it. They certainly didn't have our various scientific, mechanical skills. We don't know that much about them, but something changed. Something changed very dramatically. We are nothing like gorillas or chimpanzees, our closest biological relatives.
And this is there? What is the name of this theory that aliens somehow genetically alter? Well, this doesn't tie into McKenna's theory, right?
No, it's there was a fellow named Zechariah Sitchin, I think, who first proposed it. He began looking at the cuneiform writing of the ancient Assyrian people and their descriptions of the gods. And as he interpreted the cuneiform literature, it looked to him as if these gods were actually coming down from some other location and performing genetic experiments on the local population to mix their genes. So
Yeah.
now that hypothesis is widely disseminated across.
This is the Anunnaki theory.
Yeah.
Where they came down and created a slave species to terraform the earth.
That's right.
Yeah, that's a wild one. That's a popular one for sure.
As far as I know, it's viable. I can't say that we have strong evidence for it, but there's it does resolve this mystery of how did modern humans, evolve out of primates.
Yeah. Did you ever talk to Terrence McKenna about the monkey mushroom theory?
Yes.
What's the name of that theory again?
I don't know that it has a name. But
It's called, there's a name for it. What, stoned ape theory. That's what
stoned
it
ape
is. Stoned
theory.
ape theory. Yeah.
yeah.
That's probably my favorite one.
That also makes sense. There's every reason to think not just apes, but many other biological creatures like to alter their consciousness in different ways.
Yeah, I had a guy in here a couple months ago from India, and he was explaining to us, Steve, maybe you can remember the name of these monkeys. There's these monkeys that are in India that love to eat psychedelic mushrooms. And he was explaining how they act so much like humans, where they will only have like they don't have a lot of kids. They stay with one mate, right? They don't go out and find a bunch of mates like other primates do. They stick with one mate forever, and they only have children with them, a couple children, and they raise them, and like a lot of the way they live and the things they do in their environment are very, very similar. And he thinks that they're basically like evolving with the mushrooms in real, like stoned ape theory happening in real time. I heard Hal Puthoff used to be a Scientologist.
Yes.
That's interesting.
That's definitely true.
What do you make of
Many
that?
of the people in the original remote viewing work, Hal Puthoff, Ingo Swann, Ed May, were Scientologists.
Really?
Yeah.
What do you make of that?
I think that L. Ron Hubbard, the founder of Scientology, was onto something. And
Really?
and he was able to communicate it to these people, and that I don't endorse or support Scientology, but I think there's something there worth taking a close look at.
He was the most prolific science fiction writer of all time. I think he wrote more science fiction than anyone. Like, he's published more science fiction works, I think, than anyone in history, as far as I'm aware. And it's just the way that thing is structured, and there's so many horror stories of Scientology of people being kept as slaves.
Yeah.
And I actually interviewed the father of David Miscavige on this show years ago. And he was telling some terrifying stories of what he had to go through like that when he was in Clearwater. This is like 10 minutes away from where we're sitting right now. Is the flag, the head of Scientology, where L. Ron Hubbard where he parked his ship. And his dad was explaining how they kept him there, and he had to like escape. Like he planned out this crazy dramatic escape. How he had to get out, and he was chased by security, and there was a moment where he was being spied on by David Miscavige's people, and he knew they were following him everywhere. And there was a point where he was at the grocery store, and he had a literal heart attack at the grocery store. And he knew that those guys were there and they could have helped him. So he was like waving for them to help them because they knew that they were hired by his son to spy on him. And they just left and didn't do anything. And they were like, apparently like David wanted his dad to just die. So
that's very sad.
It's very sad. And it's, it's essentially like one of the most vicious cults that I'm aware of, but it's it's so interesting that all these guys were so into it.
Well, before it was Scientology, it was known as Dianetics.
Okay, and that was the name of the book that he published, right?
Yes.
Right.
And I had a mentor in my early years in the parapsychology program, Arthur M. Young, who was the founder of what was known at that time as the Institute for the Study of Consciousness. He was also the inventor of the Bell helicopter. the first commercially licensed helicopter, and he and his wife Ruth went through Dianetics and became Dianetic clears.
Really?
Yeah, before Scientology even was founded as a separate organization, and they got a lot out of it. So I think,
yeah, I've heard there's a lot to take from it, right?
Yeah.
There's a lot of good stuff. There's a lot of good stuff in the book, like eliminating all the negative influences in your life, focusing on, you know, and all the richest people in this town are Scientologists. Not all the richest people, but let me put it differently. Most of the Scientologists are very wealthy folks around here. And I don't know what that is. I mean, there's definitely something to it that's really beneficial for people before you start getting into the Xenu galactic overlord that came out of a volcano, and, you know.
I think it's probably true of most cults. They all have something of positive value to attract people.
Yes.
But then you get the organizational politics, and things go bad.
Yeah, yeah. Like the what was the cult where they all wore the Michael Jordan sneakers, and then they committed suicide in California.
Oh.
They thought they were going to like beam up to a spaceship to
Yes.
because there was a Hale-Bopp comet, right?
Right. Bo Peep, I think they were known as.
Yeah. They thought they were all gonna like go up to they get like beamed up to a spaceship after they killed themselves. Heaven's Gate. That's what it was.
Yeah. Mm-hmm. That was a real setback for the field of remote viewing as well, because a prominent remote viewer was associated with promoting the idea that the Hale-Bopp comet was being accompanied by a mysterious spacecraft, and so this cult built on that belief, which was not true. There wasn't a spacecraft accompanying the comet, but there had been some photograph, I think, published that might have led one to draw that conclusion. But in any case, the Heaven's Gate people took that to be true, and then the suicide resulted, and so people tended to blame the remote viewers involved, who got on, as I recall, the Art Bell show and proclaimed, you know, that there was a UFO coming along with the comet.
Yeah, and, you know, we think they're all crazy, you know, but maybe they did get beamed up to a spaceship, and maybe they're the ones that are laughing. They think, you know, look, these guys they think we all just killed each other and we were all idiots, but, you know, we're in a different planet now, and we're flying around in flying saucers. Maybe they were onto something.
Maybe.
And maybe the Scientologists are onto something. Who knows? Maybe all these documentaries and all this stuff, it's all just propaganda and strategic deception so that human beings can't figure out that Scientology really is. Maybe all that shit's real. Who knows?
Well, there's a lot of misinformation
there's a lot.
there.
It's hard to know what's real these days.
And
it's really hard.
That's where, you know, a focus on evidence and empiricism and the scientific method can be helpful.
Yeah, in specifically in like downtown Clearwater, in the area that's 10 minutes away from here, there's this beautiful downtown area with all these, you know, it's on the water. It's great. Lots of tourists come. Scientology bought basically, like, I want to say it's 75-80% of all the retail storefront buildings that are like right on the main strip there.
Oh.
And they just leave them empty, so that like businesses don't come, because they want to keep it just Scientology land. Apparently they don't want it to be like full of tourists. But there's like this weird shadow war going on between Scientology and like the mayor of Clearwater, because they want to bring in businesses and tourists, and Scientology doesn't. And Scientology's worth all this money, and they apparently, you know, still have a ton of it. And I think they're the biggest real estate holder they own more real estate than like any business in the. Can you fact check that? See how much real estate Scientology owns, because I know like years ago they used to be like the top 1 or 2 holders of commercial real estate in the U.S., but that's probably not true anymore.
I found a nice little picture. Y'all can chew on that.
Not just in Clearwater though, like in the U.S.
Oh, in the U.S. Oh.
Yeah, how much real estate does the Church of Scientology hold?
It'd be hard to compete with the Catholic Church.
Oh yeah, for sure. Well, do they really own real estate though? They're kind of a different beast, right?
Well, they have these cathedrals.
Right, all over Europe
and the U.S.
Yeah, the Catholic Church is a crazy one.
Yeah,
that's You know, I heard there's a lot of spooky shit in the Vatican too.
Yes.
So, I mean, we're here talking bad about Scientology, but there's a lot of bad shit that the Catholic Church has done too.
Well, of course, we have the witchcraft burnings, amongst other things, the Inquisition. Mm-hmm. But at the same time, the Catholic Church has a very rigorous process for evaluating claims of miracles performed by saints and so on, so that there are some very interesting cases of human levitation, for example, that have been very carefully investigated by the Catholic Church.
Yeah. You know Jeffrey Kripal?
Yes, indeed.
Yeah, he was telling me that he was called by some guy who was like at the Department of Energy or something, or DARPA, I don't remember what it was, or some aerospace company called him up to do I forget the word he used. He called it like an intellectual lounge, where they wanted him, a professor of religion, to explain to them human levitation in like antiquity. Or
it was propulsion. It was for propulsion.
Yeah, he was a propulsion expert at like JPL or something like that wanted Jeffrey to explain human levitation to them. Did you find out how much real estate the Church of Scientology owns, Steve?
All right, so I got a couple things. First off, in Clearwater, it says...
Yeah, we're looking about the country, or the world, not just Clearwater.
Right, well, so by 2024, the number of properties has swelled to 200.
Okay. All right.
I mean, 101 acres of commercial real estate.
All right. Yeah, it might not be here. Who knows? I thought they were number one, but...
Oh wow!
Hollywood properties worth about 300 million. Yeah, but that's not. Can you find out what is the current membership in Scientology? How many members of Scientology are there today? I've had a few folks in here that were prior Scientologists. I had
oh, holy shit!
25,000.
It says 4.4.
Difficult to know the exact number of active Scientologists in the United States, but the estimates range from 25,000 to 4 million. Wow.
I mean, that's an excessive...
Yeah, it's definitely not 4 million.
An official claim that there were 3.5 million in 2007.
There's a guy who we had in, Aaron Smith-Levin, who was raised in Scientology. His family was all Scientologists, and he was raised, I think it was in New Jersey, and all in Scientology. He eventually moved down here and started working for them for free. I think he got paid like 10 cents a day or something for like all of his teenage years. And he started his podcast to talk about his experience in Scientology and how he escaped and all that, and how it ruined his life and his family's lives. And what they do is they make websites with your name. Like they'll buy a domain name like jeffreymishlove.com or newthinkingaloud.com, and they'll basically smear you on the website and basically talk all this shit about you and explain how much of a bad person you are, how much of a liar you are. And they do it in a sophisticated way where they basically own the search engine results for your name or your company. So anyone who's looking for you, they're going to find these websites that they created about you that are basically just smears on you. They're really clever the way they do it. Their propaganda's insane.
Sounds vicious.
Yeah, it's quite vicious.
Mm-hmm.